Welcome to the Better Futures Lab speaker series by Steelcase. And thank you for joining us as we explore bold new approaches to equity, education, and the environment. I'm Daniel Williams, the president of the Steelcase Foundation, and I have the pleasure of hosting our session today on accessible education. I'm especially excited because the Steelcase Foundation has had the privilege of being involved in this important work that we'll explore today. Before I introduce our phenomenal speaker, I'd like to share a bit about what brings us together. The Steelcase Better Futures community was created to explore, invest, and accelerate bold new ideas and practices in collaboration with organizations around the world. Its work is aligned with the goals of quality education, reduced inequalities, and climate action. The Better Futures community is designed to bring people together to uncover opportunities for collaborative change, amplify connectivity, and encourage new ways of thinking. And new ways of thinking is what brings us to our session today, centered on accessible education. We are joined by President Philomena Mantella of Grand Valley State University, who's based in West Michigan, and she will share how she's mobilizing learners to become chief architects of their education. GVSU acts as the organizer and convener of the Rep4 Alliance. Rep4 is a powerful network of regional and national education, industry, and technology leaders who are reigniting and recreating public education as we know it. Both the Steelcase Foundation and Steelcase partner with Rep4 to support its mission. In fact, I've been lucky enough to have been a part of the very first convening that led to this work. And I'm just so excited to see how it's grown and what it's coming into. And at the Steelcase Foundation, we're incredibly excited to support President Mantella and her team through the Steelcase Foundation. I would now like to start a video that tells us a little bit more about Rep4.
These are our future, so we have to help impact them first.
Our generation can really make a difference in all of this.
I feel like we've actually made something that can be possible and change our community.
So President Mantella is the 5th president and the first woman to lead Grand Valley State University. She has an impressive 30-year career in higher education, marked by success propelling universities forward into new markets, expanded relationships, and countless new program innovations. She has improved student outcomes and market position at each university she has served. Welcome, President Mantella. We're so excited to have you with us here today. Now, as she comes on and throughout her presentation, you have an opportunity to put Q&A questions in the chat box, and then afterwards we'll spend some time talking a little bit about it. I will kick it to you, President Mantella. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's so great to be with you and all my good colleagues and friends at Steelcase, who, as Daniel said, has really been on this journey from the very beginning and been not only a supporter, but a thought partner, an innovator, a collaborator through this whole process of creating Rep4. What a joy to be able to spend an hour and talk about educational innovation, educational reform. The lens we will put on this is really unleashing our learners as a part of the process of rethinking education. And what I want to do is begin by sharing a few statements around the condition of education, just as a level set. And then talk a little bit about the journey, because I think when we are all on these journeys of experimentation, of looking for new ways, of collaborating and working across industries, we can learn a great deal from the journey itself. So I'd like to share a little bit about the journey of the creation of Rep4, then really mark the moment. Where are we at? What have we accomplished? And then what do we see ahead? So I'm going to spend about 15 minutes sharing those various components, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, which is the part that I will undoubtedly enjoy the most. So really looking forward to your feedback, your thoughts on how we do this work together. So let me say first that let's focus, and I think the work that Steelcase is doing is focused in the concept of equity and the equity gaps that we have today. So let me start in focusing on, I'm going to make 5 points on the condition of education today. And the first will be on the state of affairs as it relates to access and equity. There's probably no one on this call, if you're thinking about education, if you're reading the news, if you're deeply invested day to day in the life of an educator, wherever you sit, that doesn't realize that we have incredible work to do as it relates to equity in education. I'm going to read just one quote from a recent study that was done by the American Colleges and Universities Pell Institute. And this was pre-pandemic. So the conditions post-pandemic have worsened across the board when we talk about equity and access from the perspective of entrance to college, from the perspective of engagement in college, from the perspective of dropout rates, literacy scores, college going rates, college confidence. It doesn't matter which of those metrics you look at, they have all fallen since the 2019 study that I'm about to quote. The country has struggled to close the persistence gap related to income and degree attainment. Among students in the bottom socioeconomic quartile, 15% had earned a bachelor's degree within 8 years of their high school graduation, compared to 22% in the second quartile, 37% in the third quartile, and over 60% in the top quartile. So you can see this incredible disparity that's related to income, that is focused on first generation students, people of color, as it relates to access, outcomes, and opportunity related to college attendance and the college experience. The second point I'd like to make is that as an educational system, we're really not a system. We talk a lot about systemic change, and systemic change is tough. It's even more difficult when we see that there's a number of systems that relate to education that are all impacting one another. There is a number of stakeholders. There is political winds and forces, funding issues, labor market issues, preparation issues. There are many, many stakeholders and many, many complexities and a number of microsystems that create education. And when I'm talking about education, I'm really talking about education, the macro ecosystem, which means everything from, K through gray. And I'm really not talking about any one component, but all components of education. And there's a recent study that I'd love to point you to. It was in my inbox just earlier this week that was done by Thomas Arnett in partnership with Education Reimagined, that really looked at why is it so difficult to change our educational system, and really points to the way in which the system is interconnected and is embedded in such a way that it makes it challenging to address. The third point I'd like to make is that we know that education is not a one-size-fits-all operation, and that in fact, this moment we're at, exacerbated by coming out of a global pandemic, it really calls us to think about not one model, but multiple models, and models that relate to me, the individual, and the way that I learn, the way that I consume content, the way that I relate to experiences, others, and networks. And so one of the things I like to, just as a moment of illustration, if each of us on this call could put into the chat for just a moment, just so that we can look at it, what kind of learner are you? How do you learn best? We did this at the onset, the first convening that Daniel referenced when he said I was there at the first convening where Rep 4 was really given birth. And every person, instead of their name and their title, had the way in which they learn on their name tag. And almost everyone was slightly different. Well, how can we think about education or learning in a way that doesn't relate to me, what's on my name tag, and the way in which I work and interface with the world? So if you would, put in the chat experiential, doing, visual, whatever ways you learn, and we'll take a look at just how rich a tapestry we create as continuous learners. The fourth point I'd like to make is we're all focused on future-proofing education and learning. However, if we put 100 people in this room, asked everyone on this Zoom, what does it mean to future-proof? What does success look like? Our picture of education in the future might be very different, very wide-ranging. But I think there is two things that are fundamental. One is that we are going to have to learn all of our lifetime. The pace of change is so incredible that we have to, through the educational models we have, besides them relating in some way to me, the individual, it has to instill a love for learning. And it has to be self-directed. I have to be the architect, as Daniel says, to how I'm shaping my educational journey. I can't leave something so important, something over my lifespan, something that will relate to me differently in every setting I'm in the hands only of others, even if they're experts. My lived experience is different than yours. And so it's going to be critical that to future-proof education, that we think about the very simple concept of a love of learning and what role I play. And if you can't modify the system quickly, and we can't, not quickly, then the person in that system, relating to that system, has to appreciate the role they can play to make that system work for them. And the last point I make, and it's an important one to me, because there is a lot of conversation around educational innovation, educational reform, educational failure, loss of educational confidence, and we are losing good people out of this field. We have to appreciate that the people that are toiling every day with our young people, that they have answers, that they need to be supported. They need to be given spaces and places to innovate. They need to be among networks of colleagues that can help push their thinking. We have to not only critique those within the current system that has a level of failure, but we have to support those that are willing to toil through the journey to get through a better place. Yes, we need fresh eyes, fresh answers to go beyond educators. But the thing that I love about Steelcase's Better Futures community is it is focused on being a source for inspiration. It's focused on helping to identify models that can be scaled, that can be expanded, that can be replicated. And that's really what Rep4 is about at its heart. You saw a little bit of a video that started you off. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the journey of creating Rep4. So one of the things that my last institutional experience before coming to Grand Valley, I was there for nearly 20 years at a private university on the East Coast. And one of the things in the last decade I was there, the last 10 years, I was offered the opportunity to create sort of a greenfield educational environment, to look at the question of the future, look at digital transformation, education, look at the questions of who we were leaving behind, look at the cities we were operating in, the modalities, and begin to innovate. And I have to tell you, that really gave me the bug for sort of breaking some eggs, looking at for some new ways to think about the way in which we work. Just that experience of being in a fresh space with a lot of autonomy and a way to pull people together. So when I came to Grand Valley and the university here, which is a university born of this community, a community that said, we need a talent engine here in our community. We need an intellectual powerhouse in our community. We need an accessible public institution within our community, and we're going to be a part of this community's journey. Grand Valley is only 62 years old, and it has been changing all of its life to adapt to shifting needs. So when I got the opportunity to be at a public university in a community that appreciated the work of both education and how it can be an economic driver, an inclusive economic driver, I thought, boy, what a joy. And one of the things I wanted to bring with me, having spent some time in the innovation space in this green field, working with a lot of ed techs, a lot of companies, working in some new spaces, was the network that I had. And so in my first year, we held an education convening on the future of education. And we blended people that I knew from around the country with local leaders here, like Daniel Williams, who's here, Kim Dabbs, who's here on this call, and a number of other incredible educational leaders at the K-12 level, at the higher education level, and in community leadership roles. And we talked about what we need to do in order to begin to shift the future and change the arc of access. I have to tell you, we had 100 people in that room, tables of 8, and each table had 2 learners, 2 young people, either from high school or college. The most compelling voices in that room, albeit we had a whole lot of PhDs, a whole lot of degrees in that room, the most compelling voices were the students, their authenticity, their lived experience, the way in which they could take us through their journey. And we walked away with 5 principles that I'll share with you. First was that whatever we were going to do together, and we were not sure. I mean, one of the beauties of this, one of the things that I've learned is it's okay not to know what your destination is. We knew we were coming together with smart people to contemplate an issue. But people that know me know I'm also impatient. And so one of our principles was that we were going to come out action-oriented. We were going to pick a place to begin and start the work together. So the 5 principles were: first, learners had to be at the center. They had to be the voice that was guiding our work. We had to flip the model. The experts had to listen. The learners had to design. Second, equity had to be at the center. These weren't the learners we were serving today, but the ones we need to be serving more. Third, action-oriented. Fourth, we were going to create a platform for collaboration, a shared framework so we can look at how our work focused, flexed, was successful or failed within different settings. And last, we were not going to keep whatever we learned proprietary. We wanted it to be for the public good. You hear a lot about education and the fact that we are in a demographic downturn when you look at the number of 18 to 22-year-olds that are on the horizon the next decade. And what can happen, and we have to prevent it from happening, is we can become competitors and not be acting in the public interest or good. So one of our principles was that everything we created was going to be available for anyone who wanted to adopt it. We also took away from that convening a set of individuals who are willing to go on this journey with us. A couple that I've mentioned here today. And we started our work, and we started to come up with what Rep4 was, and we tested a proof of concept. And what I'd like to do is just fast forward you now to today on what Rep4 is, which you saw in the video, and then look at where we're going from here, and then we'll open it up. We've started, I probably drive all of the folks in the organization crazy because we continue to change our language and look for the exact right language to express what we're doing. And where we are now is what we believe is we're mobilizing learners as the chief architects for their education. That's the way we think about Rep4's purpose. We want each individual to hold on to their educational experience, not exclusively, but as the chief architect. We think about, you can proceed the slide, Rep4 as having two sides to the same coin. The work that we're doing has two dimensions. One is we're creating for the individual participant. And today, these are high school students that are in 10th through 12th grade who are underserved by higher education, by traditional higher education, low income, minoritized populations. And we want the experience that we give them through Rep4 to be a transformative experience for them, where they find their own agency and find their own voice. The palette, if you will, that they're working on is they're bringing their fresh perspective, not yet in college, to our educational system by sharing what they're concerned about, what they think we should be working on. A lot of people have said to me, well, how can they possibly do that? They haven't experienced college yet. And I will answer that question by saying that's the point. What their fears are, what their concerns are, why they think it's not there for them, are all of the things that we need to attend to and address and listen to differently. So these are students who are coming for their own journey, but they're also working on our collective journey. We think of it now as a national inspiration accelerator. It's inspiring the individual by activating their voice, their agency, a sense of their own possible self, and revealing what we've come to call the invisible curriculum to today's college experience. There are hundreds of companies working every day on making college simpler, making it more accessible. But the reality is, for all of us who have put a son or a daughter through college, we know that when it comes to your moment to do that, that there are things that are confusing. And if you have limited support, limited resources in your schools or in your home or in your community, it's even more difficult to engage with that individual curriculum. But Rep4 creates a community that inspires individuals to take hold, activate their voice, and see the control that they have, and support each other's journey. In addition, it helps to bring forward what we're calling provocations. We learned early in the journey that students in what is a week-long summit, which we're going to talk about the model itself in just a moment, aren't able to create full-blown prototypes, but they can create provocations for us to improve services or to create a new technology platform or to create a new physical technology environment that relates to their experience differently, or to think about a new way to approach a problem from a greenfield perspective. And keep going. We knew when we started this journey, although at Grand Valley, we proved the concept of the model, that we couldn't be on this journey alone and make the kind of impact that we wanted to make. And there's many reasons for that. One, we needed the intellectual community. Two, we needed settings that were fundamentally different, in which the change relationship, the change journey, we could see the ebbs and flows and pivots differently. And we needed to support one another's work if we were going to accelerate this work. So we went about reaching out to a number of institutions, and we looked for certain characteristics. You see their logos on the screen. First of all, we wanted to represent ourselves as first a national, and hopefully in the future, a global enterprise. So we wanted to look regionally. We wanted everyone to have equity at the center. We wanted all institutions that were in Rep 4 to be public, so they were accessible by price point. And so their mission was to serve all the population. And we wanted to be fundamentally different. So we wanted to be a community college, a regional master's, a PhD doctoral institution, Research One, a system, an independent institution. So what you see on the screen is the 7 institutions that today are the founders. I could have convened this group, but together we are the founders of Rep 4. Rep 4 today, again, theoretically, as I shared, is an inspiration accelerator that puts students as chief architects. The model we're using is on each of our campuses and digitally, we create regional summits that give students design thinking skills, that bring them together as a community, that inspire them to take ownership of their own journey. And the problems they work on are educational reform. We then share all of the best of their work every summer that comes out in a national convening that we've done digitally. Maybe someday we'll also do a conference that is a companion with a national convening, where the best ideas of our students are showcased by our students to educators and to other students who we also want to inspire. I should say that when we did this work, we didn't do it only as these 7 higher education institutions. We reached into our communities, to high schools and to community leaders, to collaborate on these summits with us and on the national convening with us. We wanted to do this work collaboratively and together, and to see all the dimensionality of education. We have also made a commitment to be places of experimentation, to take these provocations that we showcase now to thousands of learners who said, this is what we need to do. We need to work on this, and to place those in our institutional setting and try to evolve those prototypes. And in our futures work, we're not there yet. We want all of this to live on a virtual learning platform so that all of our work is incredibly accessible. I want to share just a glimpse of some of what the students have created. And you can see some of our colleges and what they're working on in terms of mentorship or needs or mental health or a prep curriculum that relates, or how do I create the love of learning. We also are designing together as a alliance some work that we think is highly transformative, very impactful. And there are two projects we are working on that our students created. The first we're calling Promised Unlocked Admissions. How do we have an admissions process that is an invitation for students, that begins their journey with an evaluation of their assets and then brings them in and meets them where they're at, rather than a win-loss evaluative criteria on a small subset of performance-based metrics? We're working on that together. Our students created that concept. They called it the GRIT score. And we've broadened that concept, working with not only the notion of grit, but all those non-cognitive factors, all of those external factors, the ability to even see your possible self. How can we put all that together in the beginning of a journey that is an invitation? The second prototype that we're working on is called Financially Lit. I love the name. And it's a financial literacy platform that meets students where they're at in the modes and mediums that they use, whether it is Snapchat or Instagram, in a platform that they can get snippets of what they need. There is so much great financial literacy content out there. It's been developed by institutions, by banks, by the requirements for entrance and exit interviews for federal lending. The problem with it is it's not relatable to students. It's not a safe place for students to explore deeply personal financial questions. So this just gives you a glimpse of what these brilliant students are creating and what our commitment is to continue to do this work. We started in 2019. In 2020, we came together as an alliance. We've had 2 cycles of creating these provocations, and we have that list you saw in prototyping today. We have over 10,000 students that just weighed in on the 2022 summer prototypes. And I can't wait to see which ones are going to be elevated, not only by their creation, but by their voice on what's the most important work that we do. So I just want to end by taking you into the future and acknowledging that we are in fact a startup, that I have a few answers. I don't have all the answers. I'm hoping that your questions will help me as much as I can be helpful to you. So we have plotted our year ahead, the 22-23 year. We're hoping to convene all of our campuses, founders, at a convening together in which Steelcase Corporation, and Adam, thank you, I know you're on here, has also supported our convening in Boise, which is one of our partners, in order to culminate this year's work. I want to share this year's work. First of all, this is a journey, right? We're trying to change outcomes for young people. We're trying to change institutions and the way in which they operate. So we need to commit to continued tracking and evaluation. We have 3 hypotheses we're working on in Rep 4. The first, and I want to be sure you get a sense of what these are, is that greater self-agency, which is self-efficacy, self-awareness, self-regulation, provided through this intentional institutional engagement called Rep 4, will improve college outcomes for those underrepresented learners. That's the first hypothesis. The second is that empowered underrepresented learners, their provocations for change can influence our systems and routines in a positive way. And the third is that an alliance across regions, across institutional types, in ways we don't normally meet, with an equity mindset, and a common framework for experimenting and learning, an appreciation that that's what we're doing together, can accelerate college outcomes for all learners. So the first thing we need to do is commit to continuous tracking and evaluation against these hypotheses. What's working, what's not, what are we learning? The second is to strengthen our model and expand space for curiosity. We as a set of institutions we're in this like really rich place of learning from one another, and areas that we can, many other areas we can collaborate, which is super exciting. As much as I think Grand Valley State University is one of the best institutions in the country, if you go to US News and World Report, or you go to the Common Vernacular or our history of evaluation, we're not going to be at the top of that list. So one of the things we have to do through an alliance like this is build a presence for the type of institutions that are going to be world changers, game changers in education. And I believe the kinds of institutions that we're pulling together are serving the very students we need to serve, and serving them very well, and they need to be supported on that journey. So part of Rep 4 is building the presence for us, is allowing us to be seen, allowing folks like Steelcase to see that we're doing meaningful work. And fourth, we are looking to build our model for scale and sustainability. And again, colleagues, I'm at this moment where I can't tell you what it looks like. I'm trying to figure it out. You know, building, we could, you know, take our founders and add affiliates. That's a model. We could create a toolkit available to others. We could create alliances with for-profits and ed tech to put this in a virtual or augmented reality environment. We can do a number of things, but what we have to do is look for the opportunity to scale, or our impact will be privilege for some and lack of opportunities for others. And last, we're trying to not only, it's really easy as you're working through a model like this and leading an alliance to look incrementally, as I've talked about, even through some of these, how do we make what we're doing better? It's also important to pull 10, 15, 20 years out. And we have a group together that is doing that work. And I know you know one name on that group, Jim Hackett, because he was former CEO at Steelcase and a true futurist in his own right, who said when he came to our convening last year, you have to pull 20 years out and then look back at what you're doing today. So we also have a group looking really out and saying, what could Rep 4 be? And all of that, we're hoping with good fortune, good luck, good support for sustainability will take us into the future. So let me end by where I started. I'm really grateful to my colleagues at Steelcase. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share, to be seen, and most importantly, to have you see the beauty and the brilliance of these students that are leading the work. And I turn it back to Daniel to lead us through the Q&A.
Well, great. Thank you so much for that and for sharing that journey. The one question that came up really early on for me, Dr. Mantella, was you talked about, you said education as an inclusive economic driver. And I'm wondering if you could maybe just speak a little bit more to that of what it means for education to be, how do you define sort of what inclusive economic driving means in the context of this work?
Yeah, you know, and thank you for the question. I think that when we think about Rep 4 as a model, and I've situated it where we are today, which is working with 10th through 12th graders, you know, inclusive prosperity, I'll just say for shorthand, is really having the same opportunities for college going, having the same opportunities for the fullness of journey. But the work doesn't stop here. Rep 4 could be applied downstream and saying, having the same opportunities to get experiential learning, to build a social capital, to build a network, and then have the same opportunities for starting income, job opportunities, family income, living wage. So, you know, it really is a whole arc of being sure that we're not leaving people behind and saying we as a community have done extraordinary well, but only for those with privilege, or only for the majority population, or only for these out of this zip code, or that went to these schools. So to me, we've got to reach into a model that really uses the word all.
Love that. Love that. One of the questions that came through was what are the other muses? What are the things that are inspiring you sort of outside of education that's helping to inform, are there other organizations or industries that you feel are doing similar work that you can learn from?
Yeah. What a great question. I mean, one of the things I learned from that journey I took, where I got really the greenfield opportunity, is the very first hire I made was a serial entrepreneur. I mean, I was situated, lifetime educator. I thought I was pretty creative, but I was situated in a space where I'd really never taken on a true entrepreneurial project. And so I think my first muse was to always look for people, individuals, and for perspective. So not education thinking about education. We've got learners thinking about education, educators thinking about education. But some of the folks that are working in the ed tech space, Steelcase, that's working at this convergence of technology, physical space, and learning, or is an absolute leader in corporate social responsibility. There is so much to be learned by getting outside of your environment and applying the principles back into your environment and looking for the intersectionality. And so, gosh, Daniel, the biggest thing I regret is time, not having enough of it, because every time I'm out, and I'm situating myself outside of education, I take away an inspiration for education. It's great to be on a life journey that has the kind of meaning that I think this work does, but it's so wonderful if you don't do it from an insular perspective and could see all of these different points of connection.
That's great. And one of the themes that's really obvious in all of this work is centering young people, centering students, centering those who may not have experience in the system yet, and lifting that voice up to help challenge what you feel like, what people in the system feel like may be working well, because that's the system they've been in for a long time. And there was a question around sort of as thanking you for centering students in the work, and wondering what moving forward, what kind of platforms might students be able to use to ask questions in those secure environments, to continue to engage maybe outside of the structure of those convenings as they continue in their journey of higher ed.
I want to give you one example that I think is just a marvelous illustration. In the work that we were talking about with the Future of Learning group, we pulled together a group of our faculty in computer science and design and said, we want to empower the learner voice even more. What are the possibilities, and how might we put it into this kind of some of these new environments, new technologies? And one of the faculty members said, I teach this really difficult math class, and the students on their own have created a space, for engagement with one another during the class. And they support each other in the way in which they tutor each other, they advise each other, they clarify for one another, kind of think of crowdsourcing around this class. And rather than, this faculty member, I was so impressed because his reaction wasn't like, oh my God, what do we do? How do we shut this down? It's like, how do we expand their ability to learn on their own? And so I think like the possibilities are endless. Like when we're talking about at the front end of this, when students are like contemplating going to college, and can I afford it? And do I have the space? How will I support, play the role I play in my family or community? How do I deal with my basic needs? A lot of what we're getting in those early provocations is that kind of support. But I think as it moves along, we're going to see students create their own learning environments, their own support environments, their own toolkits, their own platforms. And what we have to do is get out of their freaking way and support them, in this work.
Totally, totally. So anyone who's ever spent 8 seconds with me has heard me go on some large rant about the fact that we are how we identify success in education is off base. So it really spoke to me and resonated with me when you talk about sort of evaluating incoming students on their assets. And I know that's something that you've talked about since you started at Grand Valley, is how important it is to rethink what that process is, that higher ed shouldn't be about weeding out people, and instead, if we're an inclusive space, we need to think about how we support every student and how they show up in those ways in their assets. One of the questions that came in was along those lines, in what ways does higher education need to evolve to curate environments for students to discover their own assets, and for those assets to be appreciated in a real tangible way by the institution itself?
Yeah, it's such a good question. By the way, I love your rants. They're part of my favorite relationship with you. Yeah, I mean, I think that it really starts with the admissions process that we've talked about, and how do we create sort of how do we give students confidence in terms of where they're at? So many times, I think of my own journey in life and feeling like an imposter many, many times, as a first generation college student, not the best grades, not the best SAT scores, not the best, opportunities. Nobody put me in any AP classes, I can tell you that. But no one was looking at the gifts I had, the way I could find my way through a problem, my tenacity. I was not fearful to fail. I'd done a lot of failure. So it was like, okay, that's okay. What if I had a evaluation that helped me to see that, to help me to appreciate those as assets, to help me understand what I need to work on as even a starting point? But you can't do that and then throw students in a classroom where they're getting grades that's based on the materials that are taught. So it's a whole kind of system, interrelated, right? If we're going to appreciate that, it's got to be appreciated in a growth mindset, all the way in terms of how we learn, how we evaluate. If we do performance-based grading and move somebody on because they hit a bar, or if we give everybody a growth plan and continue to move them on at their own pace. And so there is just so much along that paradigm. And I think we've just got to jump in and begin. I've got colleagues at Grand Valley that are working on ungrading. I've got colleagues that look, one of the things I love about Grand Valley is that the faculty have such an appreciation for the whole student. So although some of these concepts might be new or fresh or different, to give the learner more agency, they appreciate that student and what they're bringing. So how do we do it more formally? You can't appreciate it informally and then grade and on the way in which you traditionally do. So I think we just got to start a number of experiments along the way, and that's why I'm really excited about higher education collaborating across alliances and elevating what they learn, so we can all move a little faster to serve a little better. Because this paradigm change is long in coming, too long in coming, and harming generations. And we're at this point of risk, right, Daniel? And that, people are coming out of the pandemic. We know for a fact some related differently to the virtual environment. We know for a fact some did so in certain subjects, and we can't put them on the same train. We've got to appreciate the impacts.
So our time flew by. One last short question to sort of to wrap this up, and it's from Josephine, who identified as a GVSU alumni and is not biased at all in declaring us a treasure of all of Michigan, GVSU, and isn't wrong either. But ask the question of how can the broader community support this effort?
Oh, thank you, Josephine. One of the things I am trying to play with is the notion of reaching students directly and creating incentives for them to participate. And so one is awareness building. Help us create networks and connections that can sustain the work as we find our model for scale. I think that could be incredibly helpful. Identify students that you think should be on this journey. And keep telling the story of Grand Valley. That really warms my heart. And I thank you for leading with that comment.
That's great. So this is it. Thank you so much, President Mantella, and thank you for all that are joining us. It was terrific to hear about everything that's happening, all the updates, and be able to engage with some conversation around it. We want to be sure to share some additional resources with you all in case you're interested in learning more. You can find more about Rep4 at rep4.org. The Steelcase Foundation is easy to access at steelcasefoundation.org if you're interested in learning more about the work that we do. And also, Steelcase recently released its 2022 impact report, and you can access that by visiting steelcase.com/ESG. We hope that you have a great rest of your day, and thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.